Hi, welcome to Atmasvast. This is Dr. Bhavin Jankaria, and today we're doing Food Updates 3. I'm late by about 2 or 3 weeks, but I was traveling, and so we're going to look at the second part of the Health Nutrition for Longevity, where we're deconstructing the 2024 ICMR NIN Dietary Guidelines. So welcome to Atmasvast, the guide to the science and art of aging healthfully. This is the companion website to the book published about 6 months ago now and lists the 15-point guide to live long healthy. I'm a radiologist and physician in practice for the last 30 odd years. The aim of Atmasvast is to understand how to live long healthy and age healthfully with the resources around you as far as possible without being dependent on the healthcare system. The site is free, but to read some of the articles, you may need to subscribe with your email ID. So that's the 15-point guide, and you can pause the video if you'd like to just go through it. And when it comes to food, while we are deconstructing the guidelines, the overall message pretty much remains this. So the guidelines have about 17 points. And if you remove those related to pregnant and lactating women, these are the 4 that we looked at the last time. And these are the 6 that we will look at now: restricting salt intake, safe and clean food, good pre-cooking and cooking methods, adequate water, minimizing consumption of fat, sugar, salt, and UPFs, and reading information on food labels. So let's look at guideline 5, restricting salt intake, and then the sub points are using iodized salt and restricting to a maximum of 5 grams of sodium per day, restricting processed foods which have a higher salt intake, and eating plenty of vegetables and fruits. But it's not easy as easy as it seems. Since we cannot accurately measure sodium intake in our body, everything basically becomes a guesstimate. And the only way to minimize salt consumption is to reduce the consumption of UPFs, not to add extra salt to food, and using a potassium enriched salt substitute, or what we call PES. And I did talk about this in detail a few weeks ago, but this is really the only way to do that. And you can go through this article at atmasvast.com/salt03 to go through that in detail. The 6th guideline is consuming safe and clean foods, and then there are a whole lot of instructions here. But the bottom line is that you need to wash the food well. Don't overwash them. Wash your hands with soap and water. Store raw and cooked foods separately, refrigerate perishable items, maintain good hygiene, etc. And this is sensible because given that WASH, which is an acronym for washing, sanitation, and hygiene, is likely the most important socio-economic reason for increased longevity, along with vaccines and antibiotics and improved maternal and child mortality, it's just a good idea to follow this. The 7th guideline is adopting appropriate pre-cooking and cooking methods, and there's a whole list here. Now, this is mainly from the cooking perspective. This really has nothing to do with improving our health span and lifespan. It's just about improving the quality of the food that we eat, improving the nutrient intake, but otherwise doesn't change how we're going to live. And so the guideline is good from a practical perspective, but doesn't otherwise do anything for us. The 8th guideline is drinking adequate quantity of water, and they've given an image on the website as well as in the PDF. And this is, again, common sense stuff: drinking adequate quantities of safe water, boil water when the safety of the water is in doubt, consume fresh fruits rather than in juice form, prefer buttermilk, tender coconut water, lemon water, avoid synthetic soft drinks and carbonated beverages. And synthetic soft drinks are not substitutes for water. And then avoiding alcohol. And they also then talk about tea, coffee, etc. So adequate water is required, but a good idea would be to listen to your body, because overhydration is equally dangerous, especially in the elderly, where it can cause hyponatremia and other issues as well. But the guidelines then muddy the waters by discussing the ill effects of alcohol and coffee, tea. So the guideline is drink safe, adequate, safe water. But then they start talking about alcohol is bad and coffee, tea may be bad, etc., which takes away the focus from the fact that we need to make sure that we're drinking adequate fluids in some form or the other. Guideline 9 says minimize the consumption of high fat, sugar, salt, and ultra processed foods. And now this is really a repetition of most of the other stuff that has already been said. So you do need to reduce the consumption of foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar, and those that are ultra processed, and prefer fresh and minimally processed foods, etc. And all of these are here. You can, freeze the video if you want to go through this in detail, or check out the PDF anyway. The issue, of course, is that while it is important to do this, it's also important to understand that not all UPFs are bad, and that the classification does not take into account the complexities involved. In fact, I started the food updates with this. The title was From Parle-G to Pringles and Re-examining the Evidence on UPFs. And I think you should maybe go through this if you haven't, but that's how I started the food updates last month, and we're on the 3rd edition of that. The 10th guideline, and which really kind of kicks up a storm for me, is reading the information on food labels to make informed and healthy food choices. And then you get this picture from the PDF and saying that, HFSS AI is regulating nutrition and health claims, read the labels, and then what the labels should do, etc. But this presupposes a certain level of education and understanding, and then actually brings up the issue of how patronizing the guidelines seem to be. The vast majority of Indians is unlikely to even know of the existence of these guidelines, leave alone read them, and leave alone reading food labels, because you pretty much got them in English. I couldn't really find a Hindi or a vernacular version. I'm sure they exist, and if they're not there, they should. But then you're talking about reading food labels, which even for somebody who is otherwise educated would have to be extremely motivated to do that each time you go ahead and buy something from the stores. Anyway, what does this mean for you and I? The ICMR NIN guidelines are in sync with standard knowledge bases and guidelines across the world. They reiterate the consumption of a predominantly plant-based diet with adequate protein intake, some control over sugar and salt, while keeping a check on the consumption of UPFs and maintaining good hygiene standards. Why Atmaswast? Because being healthy is much more than mere absence of sickness. There's much more to health than healthcare. Your health is your responsibility and no one else's. And no one but you yourself can ensure that you live a long life healthy with a long health span and lifespan. That's the book that's available physically on Amazon and the Kindle edition. That's the guide. This is the only thing that you would have to pay for if you want to buy the book. Atmaswast.com, which has all the information but in the form of separate articles, is for free. That's the QR code for that, and they will always remain free. This is a passion project to make sure that everyone gets to know what is the current state of data that tells us what we need to do to live long healthy. Thank you so much for listening to me.